It was a sunny morning in Brightvale City, and the streets were full of busy people. Shiny cars moved along the road, and colorful shops lined every corner. Street vendors shouted to sell their fruits and snacks. Children laughed and played as their parents hurried to work. In the middle of this lively city, there was a tall stone statue with a large fountain. People often came to sit on the fountain's edge to chat or rest. On this day, something felt different. A beggar sat close to the statue. He wore old, torn clothes and had a thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His hair was tangled, and his eyes were dark and strange. He did not speak or shake a cup for coins like other beggars. Instead, he just watched people who passed by. A businesswoman named Carla walked past him. She carried a fancy bag and wore shiny shoes. She looked at the beggar with pity. Carla stopped for a moment, opened her purse, and pulled out a small coin. "Here," she said gently, bending down. "Buy something warm to eat." The beggar lifted his head slowly. His eyes locked onto Carla's. For a moment, Carla felt a chill run through her body, as if a cold wind had brushed past her heart. The beggar took the coin without a word. He gave a slow nod. Carla smiled weakly, feeling that something was off, but she could not say why. Before Carla could walk away, the beggar whispered in a low voice, "Thank you for your kindness. I wish you success." Carla tried to smile again, but a strange fear rose in her chest. She hurried away, hoping to forget the odd feeling in the beggar's gaze. Later that day, a group of friends gathered near the fountain. They laughed and talked about their weekend plans. The beggar sat silently, his head turned in their direction. Whenever someone laughed or smiled, he seemed to watch them more closely. A young boy, who was playing with a new ball, kicked it too far, and it rolled to the beggar's feet. The beggar picked up the ball. The boy ran over to get it, looking at the beggar's tired face. "Thanks, mister," the boy said cheerfully. Again, the beggar nodded. But as the boy took his ball back, he too felt a small, cold shiver. He did not understand it, so he simply ran back to his friends. Later that evening, when the sky turned orange and purple and most people started heading home, the beggar remained there. A police officer walked by and paused. The officer felt a bit uneasy but decided to ask the beggar if he needed help. "Sir, are you okay?" the officer asked. "It's getting late. Do you have anywhere to sleep?" The beggar shook his head and just stared at the ground. The officer wanted to be kind, so he put a few coins next to the beggar. "There's a shelter down the street," the officer said. "You can get a meal and a bed there." The beggar didn't move, but he whispered something too low to hear. The officer tilted his head. "What did you say?" he asked. "Thank you," the beggar replied softly, not lifting his eyes. The officer left, feeling a strange sadness. He could not explain why the air around the beggar seemed so heavy, as if an invisible cloak of darkness hung around him. Soon, the city became quieter. Street lights turned on. The fountain's water shimmered under the yellow glow. The beggar stayed in the same spot. High above, the moon rose, round and bright, yet the beggar still did not leave. He watched as the last people left the square. In the stillness, he sighed. His sigh was long and sounded full of sorrow. Then, slowly, he stood up, dusted off his torn clothes, and walked away into a narrow alley. No one saw him go. No one heard his footsteps echo in the darkness. That night, something very strange happened in Brightvale City. Carla, the businesswoman who had kindly given the beggar money, sat in her home, trying to plan a big meeting for the next day. She found herself unable to focus. She forgot simple tasks. She felt restless, as if a cloud of worry covered her mind. She did not know why. She had always been calm and organized. Now, it was as if her success and confidence had started to slip away. Outside, the moon shone brightly, but for Carla, the night felt darker than ever. She shook her head, trying to chase away these odd feelings. But the more she tried, the heavier her heart felt. And just as the clock struck midnight, she thought of the beggar's strange eyes. Somewhere else in the city, the beggar stood under a dim streetlight. He held the small coin Carla had given him. He closed his eyes, and a tiny glow formed around the coin. His mouth moved, whispering words no one could understand. When he opened his eyes again, a faint grin appeared on his face. He had taken the first step, and soon, Carla's shining success would be his to hold. When morning arrived, the streets of Bright Vale City were busy again. People hurried to work and children ran to school. But in an apartment near the edge of the city, Carla woke up with a pounding headache. She was supposed to give an important presentation at her company. She had prepared for weeks, but today, she could barely think straight. Carla stood in front of her mirror. Her eyes looked tired, and her hair was messy. She tried to put on makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes, but her hands shook. She told herself to calm down. "Everything will be fine," she whispered, almost like a prayer. She quickly got dressed, grabbed her laptop, and rushed to her car. On the drive to work, she nearly collided with another car at a red light. She apologized through her window, feeling embarrassed. This was not like her at all. She was usually very careful. Once she reached her office, she ran to the conference room, hoping she wasn't late. Her boss and coworkers were already there, waiting. She tried to start her presentation. She clicked to show her slides on the big screen. But the slides were completely jumbled. Words were missing, and data was incorrect. Carla gasped in shock. Her boss frowned. "Carla, what happened? This isn't the plan we discussed yesterday." Carla stammered, I don't understand. It was perfect last night. I don't know what's going on." Her mind spun. She felt sweaty and panicked. Her coworkers looked concerned. Carla tried to remember her notes by heart, but her thoughts felt foggy. No matter how hard she tried, the details slipped away. She ended the presentation in a shaky voice, apologizing for the confusion. After the meeting, Carla's boss asked her to stay behind. He folded his arms and looked worried. "Are you all right? This is not like you. You're one of our best workers." Carla shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I've been feeling strange since last night. I tried my best." Her boss sighed. "Take the day off. Go see a doctor or get some rest. We'll figure this out later." Carla's cheeks burned with shame. She left the office, her head hanging low. This was the first time she had ever failed so badly at work. She could not understand what was happening to her. Meanwhile, across town, the beggar sat in his usual spot near the fountain. He watched a group of teenagers chat and eat snacks. Some tossed him coins, and others walked by without looking at him. Each time someone smiled or seemed proud of something, the beggar would stare with an intense look in his eyes. A young girl named Lucy was celebrating a small victory. She had won a local singing contest. Lucy told her friends excitedly, "The judge said I have a real talent. I can't wait to show my parents the trophy." She clutched a small gold trophy to her chest, beaming with joy. Then she noticed the beggar looking at her. Feeling kind, she walked over and offered him a small sandwich she had packed. "Here," Lucy said brightly, "I don't have money, but you can have my extra sandwich. It's turkey and cheese. My mom made it." The beggar lifted his eyes to her. She felt that same chill Carla had felt the day before. But Lucy's heart was pure. She pushed the sandwich into his hands gently. "Thank you," he whispered, before his gaze flicked to the shiny trophy in Lucy's other hand. Lucy suddenly felt strange, as if a shadow passed over her. She forced a small smile and returned to her friends. Later that afternoon, the same group of teenagers decided to go home. Lucy tried to sing a new song she had written, but her voice sounded shaky and off-key. Her friends stared, surprised. They had heard her sing perfectly before. Lucy coughed, clearing her throat. "Maybe I'm just tired," she said. But a knot of worry formed in her stomach. In a hidden corner of the city, the beggar left his spot by the fountain. He turned into an alleyway filled with tall buildings and trash bins. Once he was alone, he took out the sandwich Lucy gave him. He muttered in a low voice, words that sounded more like a chant than normal speech. The sandwich began to glow a faint yellow, just for a moment. Then the light vanished, as though it had been swallowed by darkness. At that same moment, Lucy felt a sudden drop in her confidence. She tried humming a tune, but her voice broke. She could not figure out why fear gripped her heart. Back at her apartment, Carla curled up on her sofa, feeling sick and confused. She flicked through channels on her TV, trying to distract herself from the dreadful day. Suddenly, she saw a news report about a rising singer who had lost her voice. Carla turned up the volume, feeling a strange connection to this story. The news anchor said, "Lucy, the young talent who wowed the audience last week, can barely sing today. Doctors are unsure why her voice has weakened. They say she might just need rest, but Lucy insists she's never had this problem before." Carla frowned. "That's odd," she muttered. Then she remembered the beggar. A chill ran down her spine. No, she told herself, that can't be it. Beggars can't just steal talent and success. That makes no sense. Yet in her heart, she felt a small spark of fear. In the gathering dusk, the beggar stood at the edge of the city square once more. His eyes gleamed with a cold satisfaction. Two people, Carla and Lucy, had given him small pieces of their light. Their success. Their glory. And now, it belonged to him. A few days passed in Brightvale City, and the stories of strange misfortunes spread slowly from person to person. Carla's co-workers noticed her ongoing struggle. She could barely complete the simplest tasks. Lucy missed school to visit doctors, who could find no problem with her throat. Many people who had once been joyful found themselves feeling down, lost, and lacking the spark they used to have. It was a quiet kind of sadness that nobody could explain. Some blamed the weather for making them feel low, while others thought they were just under stress. One bright afternoon, a young journalist named Mira walked through the city square. She wore a backpack stuffed with notebooks and a small camera. Mira was known for being curious and always chasing a good story. She noticed the drooping faces around her. Something felt off about the city's energy. As she passed the old fountain, she paused when she saw the beggar. She recognized him. He had been in the same spot all week. Mira observed how people seemed to grow uneasy when they walked past him. She took out her camera and zoomed in, snapping a few photos. She walked closer, her sandals tapping on the pavement. The beggar barely moved. Mira spoke in a soft but clear voice, "Hello, sir. Can I ask you a few questions?" The beggar lifted his gaze. His dark eyes bored into Mira's, but she did not flinch. She was both brave and curious. "I've seen you here many times," she continued. "Do you have a name?" He did not answer. Mira pressed on, "I'm a journalist. I'd like to know how you ended up here. Where are you from?" Still, the beggar remained silent. Mira noticed how tightly he clutched the torn blanket around his shoulders. She wondered if he felt cold despite the warm sun overhead. Or perhaps he was hiding something beneath it. Just then, a local fruit seller interrupted, waving an apple at Mira. "You want to know about him?" the seller asked, nodding at the beggar. "He's been around for days, maybe weeks. People say that after they help him, they lose something important. It's strange, like he carries bad luck." Mira turned to the fruit seller, intrigued. What do you mean by bad luck? The seller shrugged. Hard to say. But my cousin gave him some money last week. The next day, my cousin's best horse got sick, and then his farm business went down. Myra's eyes lit up with curiosity. Did your cousin talk to the beggar? The seller nodded. Yes, he said the beggar just whispered a thanks and walked away. But my cousin swears that the beggar cursed him. The seller shook his head. But curses aren't real, right? Maybe it's just a coincidence. Mira looked back at the beggar. The man's face was unreadable, but his eyes seemed to glow for a moment. It made Myra's skin crawl, but she hid her fear. She offered the beggar a small bread roll she had in her bag. I don't believe in curses, she said gently. But if you're hungry, please eat. The beggar took the bread with a slow nod. Mira watched closely, half expecting some dramatic change, but nothing happened right then. She said goodbye and left, planning to investigate further. As Mira walked away, the fruit seller came after her. Miss, be careful, he warned. I've heard whispers around the city. Some say this beggar feeds on people's success. They call him the glory thief. Mira raised an eyebrow. Glory thief? That sounds like a spooky story. But I'll keep my eyes open. Thank you. Before night fell, Mira visited Lucy's home, having heard rumors of the young singer losing her voice. Lucy welcomed her with a tired smile. Her parents stood by, worried. Mira sat across from Lucy, her notebook ready. Lucy, can you tell me what happened? Lucy fiddled with a scarf around her neck. Her voice was hoarse. I was fine until a few days ago. I gave a sandwich to a beggar in the city square, and then, it's like my singing power just disappeared. She coughed a bit, looking sad. The doctors say my throat is healthy. There's no infection, no damage. They don't know what's wrong. Mira jotted down notes. Did you speak with this beggar after giving him the sandwich? Lucy shook her head. He only said thank you. But his eyes felt weird, like he was looking deep inside me. Mira pressed her lips together. I see. Thank you for sharing this, Lucy. I'm sorry you're going through this. Lucy's mother spoke up, her voice trembling. Do you think this man harmed my daughter? Is it a curse? Mira tried to be calm and reassuring. I don't know yet. But I'll find out the truth. That evening, Mira returned to her small apartment and reviewed her notes. She had heard multiple stories of people giving the beggar something, money, food, help, and then losing something precious soon after. Some lost confidence, others lost success, and Lucy lost her singing voice. Could it really be this beggar causing it all? Mira felt uncertain. She had never written about magic or curses before. Yet the pattern was too strong to ignore. While Mira tried to put the clues together, the beggar slowly made his way down a quiet street. Night had fallen, and bright stars twinkled above the silent buildings. He ducked behind an old bookstore. There, in the shadows, he took out a small collection of items, coins, bits of food, tiny gifts from different people. Each seemed to hold a soft glow, invisible to most eyes, but visible to him. He muttered words in a strange language, and the glow from these objects moved toward him, like tiny fireflies. His eyes closed, and he inhaled deeply. When he opened them again, he appeared stronger. The wrinkles on his face seemed less deep, and his posture more firm. High above, the moon shone brightly. A cat meowed, startled by the strange energy. The beggar cast a glance at the cat, and it quickly ran off. In that moment, any doubt about the beggar's unnatural power would have vanished if someone had been watching. He was not just a beggar. He was something more, something dark, feeding on the success and light of others. But the city slept on, unaware, except for a few worried souls. and the whispers of a curse spread like tiny sparks, slowly catching fire in the hearts and minds of Bright Vale's people. Late that night, Mira could not sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind spinning with questions. Finally, she got out of bed, took her camera, and decided to walk around the city. Maybe she could catch the beggar doing something unusual. The streets were quiet, and the air felt cool against her skin. Most shops were closed, and only a few streetlights lit the sidewalks. Myra's shoes tapped softly on the pavement as she made her way to the city square. She didn't see the beggar at his usual spot near the fountain. The stone statue looked lonely in the dim glow of the streetlights. Water still flowed from the fountain, creating a soft splashing sound. Mira checked behind some benches and even peeked into a nearby alley, but the beggar was nowhere to be found. Feeling a bit discouraged, she decided to circle around and explore the side streets. After a few minutes, she noticed a faint light flickering at the far end of a narrow alley. She quietly approached and peeked around the corner. There, she saw the beggar. He was kneeling on the ground, surrounded by small trinkets, a shiny coin, a torn piece of fabric, maybe a button or two, and other odd items. Mira recognized the coin Carla had once described, the one she had given to the beggar. She saw a small sandwich wrapper that might have come from Lucy's sandwich. Next to it was a broken pen, a faded business card, and even a small piece of ribbon. The beggar's eyes were shut, and he was chanting quietly. The items on the ground glowed with a soft, pulsing light. It was as if these objects had tiny hearts beating in them. Mira watched in amazement, her own heart hammering in her chest. She held up her camera and clicked, trying to capture photos. But to her surprise, the camera screen showed only darkness. She tried adjusting the settings, but still, nothing showed up. It was as if the glowing objects did not exist in the camera's view. This frightened Mira, but also made her more determined. She took a few shaky notes in her notebook. She wanted proof. Suddenly, the beggar's eyes opened. He turned his head slowly, looking straight at Mira. She held her breath, feeling as if she had been caught doing something wrong. The beggar stood up, his tall shape like a dark shadow against the alley walls. Mira couldn't run. She was frozen in place. The beggar took a step toward her, the glowing objects still shining on the ground. Then he spoke in a voice that sounded strangely calm. "You see too much," he whispered. Mira gathered her courage. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling a bit. "What are you doing with those things?" The beggar's eyes narrowed. "I am taking back what the world owes me." His words were quiet, but they echoed in the alley like a cold wind. Mira didn't understand. What does that mean? Why are people losing their talents, their luck, their success after meeting you? He did not answer. Instead, he bent down and picked up the glowing items. One by one, he tucked them under his tattered blanket. The light faded from them, and as it did, Mira felt a strange pressure in the air, like the atmosphere had grown heavy. Then, without another word, the beggar walked past her, his boots scraping the concrete. Mira followed him with her eyes. He moved slowly but with purpose. She had a million questions swirling in her mind, but fear kept her silent. After he disappeared into the darkness, Mira realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out in a gasp. Her hands shook as she checked the photos on her camera again. The images were just black squares, no sign of the glow, no sign of the beggar's face. She wrote down the events of the night, her handwriting messy from adrenaline. She had witnessed something no one else in the city would believe without proof. But now, she needed to find a way to uncover the truth behind this beggar's powers. She was sure of one thing: this was no mere curse. It was something deeper, something old and dangerous. When Mira finally made it back to her apartment, the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. She locked her door, turned off her phone, and sat on her bed, replaying the scene in her mind. She wanted to understand how the beggar's ritual worked and what it meant. Taking back what the world owes me, she repeated to herself. It suggested the beggar believed he had been wronged or robbed in his past. Perhaps something was stolen from him, and now he found a way to steal from others. She also wondered about the glowing energy in those items. Why could it not be captured by her camera? Was it magic, or some sort of hidden force that normal eyes can't usually see? She remembered the fear in Lucy's eyes and the exhaustion on Carla's face. Both had lost something valuable after helping the beggar. Yet the beggar's words made it sound like he felt justified in his actions, as if he had no choice. Mira decided she needed more information. She would start by talking to people who had fallen victim to the beggar's strange power. Then she would try to uncover his past. Maybe she could learn the truth about where he came from and how he gained these abilities. But for now, she needed rest. She placed her notebook on the bedside table. Before falling asleep, she thought of the beggar's last words in the alley. There was a sadness there, hidden under his cold tone. That night, Mira dreamed of glowing objects and whispered chants. In her dream, the beggar stood on top of a high tower, holding a ball of light that swirled with color. As he crushed it in his hands, those colors faded to gray, and the wind carried away the last sparks of light. Mira woke up with sweat on her forehead. She glanced at her clock. It was still early morning. The dream's images clung to her mind, but she forced herself to calm down. A new day was beginning in Brightvale City, but the shadow of the beggar's curse would not disappear so easily. Mira pulled on her shoes and grabbed her things, ready to continue her investigation. She vowed to uncover the secrets behind this glory thief, no matter what dangers lay ahead. That morning, Mira began her search for more clues about the beggar's identity. She visited the city library, a large building with marble steps and tall pillars. Inside, rows of wooden shelves stood like silent guards. The smell of old books filled the air, mixed with the soft hum of the heating system. Mira greeted the librarian, Ms. Green, a kindly woman with round glasses. "Good morning," Mira said politely. "I'm looking for old records about people who lived or studied here a long time ago. Maybe newspapers, diaries, or anything that could help me find out about a man who might have once been a scholar." Ms. Green pushed her glasses up and gave a gentle smile. "You've come to the right place, dear. Any specific names or dates?" Mira shook her head. "I'm not sure of his name yet. But I think he was once a very bright person who lost everything. Now he might be living as a beggar." Ms. Green looked surprised. "Well, that's quite a puzzle. We do have archives that go back many years. You can check the old newspapers and university records in the back room. Just be careful with the fragile papers." "Thank you," said Mira, and she headed into the archive section. Dust motes danced in the sunlight as she flipped through thick folders, scanning articles about local events, missing persons, or unusual happenings. Hours went by, and Mira felt her eyes grow tired. At last, she stumbled upon a small note in a newspaper from 20 years ago. It mentioned a student named Darius who had been a top scholar at Brightvale University. He was known for his incredible intelligence and his passion for ancient history and languages. However, the article mentioned a scandal. Darius accused a powerful professor of stealing his research and publishing it under his own name. Darius tried to fight back, but he had no money and no family support. The professor was popular, and nobody believed Darius. The scandal ended with Darius being expelled. After that, no one heard from him again. Myra's heart pounded. Could this be the beggar's backstory? The timeline fit. She snapped a photo of the article with her phone, intending to dig deeper. She also found another small piece of information. Some people claimed Darius turned to studying forbidden texts in his anger and shame, hoping to find a way to restore his lost honor. That might explain the strange language he uses, she whispered to herself, recalling the chanting she heard. Next, she checked the university's records. She found Darius's name in old class rosters, each describing him as a brilliant student with top marks. But then his record stopped abruptly, with the note, expelled due to academic misconduct. Mira frowned. This all sounded unfair. She wondered if Darius had truly been wronged, or if he had done something to break the university rules. Maybe it was both. Leaving the library, Mira walked across town to Brightvale University. She wanted to see if anyone remembered Darius. The campus was busy with students chatting, studying, and hurrying to classes. She felt a bit out of place, but determined to keep asking questions. Eventually, she found a retired professor named Drive West, who had been teaching when Darius was a student. Drive West was old and used a cane to walk. He invited Mira to sit on a bench under a big oak tree. Darius? Drive West repeated, thinking hard. Yes, I remember him. Tall, quiet boy. Very bright indeed. He always had his nose in ancient books. Why was he expelled? Mira asked gently. Drive West sighed. The official reason was that he cheated or stole another professor's research. But I never believed that. Darius insisted the professor stole his work. He became so upset that he threatened to expose him, but the professor was powerful. The rumor was that Darius lost everything, his scholarship, his dreams, even his friends turned against him. Mira bit her lip. What happened to him afterward? Drive West shook his head. No one knows. He just vanished. Some said he traveled to distant libraries, studying forbidden magic to seek revenge. Others said he went mad from anger and shame. He looked at Mira with concern. Why do you ask? Is he back? Mira took a deep breath. I think he might be in the city, living as a beggar. People say he's causing strange misfortunes. They call him the glory thief. Drive West's eyes widened. He gently tapped his cane on the ground. If that's true, it means Darius went down a very dark path. I remember he was a kind boy at first, but bitterness can change a person. If he's using forbidden magic, he could be very dangerous. Mira thanked Drive West for his time. She left the university with a heavier heart. Now she understood why the beggar said he was taking back what the world owed him. He believed he had been robbed of his future by someone else's greed and lies. His anger, combined with his knowledge of ancient texts, led him to a magic that steals people's success or gifts. He was reclaiming what he felt was unfairly taken from him. But was that truly justice, or just another form of injustice? That evening, Mira typed up her findings, forming the beginning of a story for her news blog. She titled it, The Hidden Scholar, The Tragic Tale of Brightvale's Glory Thief. She hesitated before publishing it. If she did, the beggar might go into hiding or become more dangerous. But the city deserved to know the truth. She saved the draft and decided to sleep on it. Meanwhile, in another dark alley, the beggar, Darius, repeated his nightly ritual with the trinkets he had collected. He was stronger now than ever before, standing straighter and speaking more clearly. His eyes no longer looked hollow. Yet a shadow of sorrow still lingered on his face. He remembered his old dreams, becoming a famous scholar, helping people learn about ancient history. He once wanted to discover cures for diseases, to share knowledge with the world. But that dream was crushed by betrayal. Now, he only knew the path of revenge. Night after night, the city's bright lights seemed to flicker with each new soul that unknowingly donated a piece of their glory to him. Darius believed this was the only way to make things right. He told himself that the success he took was never truly deserved by others. In his mind, he was simply balancing the scales. Yet deep in his heart, a small voice questioned him, "Is this who you wanted to be, Darius?" But he pushed that voice away, drowned it with the whispered words of forbidden power. Little did he know that Mira was closer to revealing his past than he could have imagined. Soon, the path of the beggar and the path of the brave journalist would collide. And when they did, the fate of both would be changed forever. In a quiet part of Brightvale City, a young artist named Roland was hard at work in his small studio. He loved painting bright landscapes and smiling faces. His works made people feel happy and hopeful. Roland had recently become popular online, and a local art gallery planned to showcase his work. Early one morning, Roland decided to visit the city square, hoping to find new inspiration. He loved watching people go about their daily lives. It gave him ideas for his paintings. He set up his easel near the fountain. While he sketched the statue, he saw the beggar sitting a few steps away, wrapped in that same tattered blanket. Roland noticed how the beggar's eyes seemed distant, as if he carried a heavy sadness. Feeling a wave of sympathy, Roland took out a small pack of colored pencils he had bought the day before. He walked over and offered them to the beggar. "Hello, sir," Roland said with a kind smile. "I'm an artist. You look like you might enjoy some color in your life. These pencils are new. Maybe you can draw if you'd like." The beggar lifted his gaze, staring at Roland. Something about Roland's warm smile caught his attention. There was a gentle shine in Roland's eyes, the same shine Carla and Lucy once had before their talents faded. For a moment, the beggar seemed almost touched by the gesture. But then his eyes hardened. He took the pencils, his fingers brushing against Roland's hand. Roland felt a strange chill, but he shook it off as just the morning breeze. "Thank you," the beggar said softly. Roland returned to his easel, feeling good about his small act of kindness. Later, he packed up his painting supplies and headed to the gallery, excited to discuss his upcoming art show. Across town, Mira was interviewing Carla, who was still struggling at work. Carla's eyes were red from lack of sleep, and her voice trembled as she spoke. "I don't know how it happened," Carla said, shaking her head. "I used to be so confident. Now I can't even remember my own phone number sometimes. It started right after I gave money to that beggar." Mira nodded, scribbling notes. "You're not alone, Carla. Many people are experiencing similar things. Do you remember anything about the beggar?" Carla shivered. "He barely spoke, but his eyes, they felt like they were sucking something out of me. It sounds silly, but that's how it felt." Just then, Carla's phone rang. She glanced at it, her face growing even paler. "It's my boss," she whispered, stepping aside to answer the call. Mira packed up her notes, determined to warn others about the beggar. She thought about Roland, the artist who was quickly rising in fame. She had seen an article about his upcoming show. If the beggar was drawn to successful people, then Roland might be the next target. Without hesitation, Mira rushed to the art gallery, a modern building with large windows. Paintings hung on white walls, and a few sculptures stood in the corners. She found Roland setting up a bright canvas, humming happily to himself. "Excuse me," Mira said, approaching him. "Are you Roland?" He smiled. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" Mira introduced herself. "I'm a journalist investigating some strange events in the city. Have you met a beggar near the fountain recently?" Roland blinked in surprise. "Yes, actually, I gave him some colored pencils this morning. He seemed lonely." "Why do you ask?" Myra's eyes widened. "Listen carefully. This might sound odd, but that beggar is dangerous. People who help him lose their special talents or luck. It's like he drains their success. I've talked to victims, and they all mention him." Roland laughed nervously. "That sounds like a scary fairy tale. Are you serious?" "I know it's hard to believe," Mira said, her voice urgent. "But look at what happened to others. A singer lost her voice, a businesswoman lost her confidence. Please, be careful." Roland frowned, thinking about the chill he felt when he touched the beggar's hand. But he shrugged. "I appreciate your concern. I'll be careful, but I don't believe in curses." Mira tried once more. Just stay away from him, okay? If he approaches you, don't let him take anything else from you, no gifts, nothing. Roland nodded politely. Okay, I promise I'll keep my distance. That seemed to satisfy Mira, at least for the moment. She said goodbye, leaving Roland to prepare for his art show. However, deep down, Roland was curious. He was an artist, always seeking stories and emotions to paint. The idea of a beggar with mystical powers sounded like something out of a fantasy book. Could it really be true? 2 days later, Roland's art show opened with excitement and positive reviews. People admired his colorful paintings, calling them refreshing and uplifting. Roland sold several pieces, earning enough money to upgrade his studio. He was thrilled, and so were the gallery owners, who said his art was truly special. That same night, after the show, Roland felt like celebrating. He decided to walk through the city square on his way home, enjoying the night air. The streets were mostly empty, the fountain's water glistening under the streetlights. Then he spotted the beggar, hunched over on a bench. Roland felt a tug in his heart. He remembered Myra's warning, but he also believed in kindness. He approached slowly. "Sir, are you all right?" Roland asked softly. The beggar looked up. His eyes were red, and his face seemed tormented, as if he carried a heavy secret. He recognized Roland immediately. Roland sat next to him, ignoring the chill that crawled up his spine. "You look troubled," Roland said. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The beggar let out a shaky breath. "No one can help me," he murmured. Roland's curiosity grew stronger. "Why not?" The beggar closed his eyes. For a moment, Roland thought he saw tears. "I lost my future because of someone else's greed," the beggar replied. "Now, I can only survive by taking from others. It's all I know." Roland felt pity. He reached out, resting a hand on the beggar's shoulder. The beggar stiffened at the touch, but he did not pull away. "I'm sorry," Roland said softly. "Maybe there's another way." The beggar opened his eyes and locked them with Roland's. The intensity in that gaze was overwhelming, yet Roland found a strange compassion rising within him. "You have a bright light," the beggar said, his voice shaking. "I can see it glowing inside you." Roland didn't move, but his heart beat faster. "My art is my passion. I'm happy to share it with the world." The beggar's lips curled into a sad half-smile. "Yes, your gift is pure." He let out a small, bitter laugh. "But if I don't take it, I'll fade away." Roland thought of Myra's warning, of Lucy's lost voice and Carla's lost confidence. Fear gripped him, but he couldn't look away from the suffering on the beggar's face. In that moment of hesitation, the beggar placed a hand over Roland's. A faint light flickered between their palms. Roland felt his vision blur for a second, and his mind swam with strange images, ancient books, a younger man crying, a dark ritual under the moon. Then Roland pulled back with a gasp. The beggar stood up, his eyes glowing for a moment before turning dull again. "Forgive me," he whispered, hobbling away into the night. Roland sat there, breathing heavily. He felt something shift inside him, as if a piece of his joy had been plucked out. He remembered Myra's words. Had he just given a piece of his gift away? Looking at his trembling hands, Roland silently feared what the next day would bring. The following morning, Roland woke up early. He rushed to his studio, eager yet terrified to see if he could still paint. His heart pounded as he picked up a brush. He dipped the brush into a bright yellow paint, moved it over the canvas, and froze. No image came to mind. His creativity felt blocked, as if a door in his head had slammed shut. He tried to force himself to paint something, anything. But his colors looked dull, his lines shaky. "What's happening to me?" he whispered, tears burning his eyes. Yesterday, he had been so full of ideas. Now it felt like an empty desert in his mind. Roland remembered his encounter with the beggar. He realized with a sinking heart that the stories must be true. The beggar had indeed taken his creative spark. Desperate, Roland grabbed his phone and called Mira. She answered on the second ring. "Mira, it's me, Roland." "You were right," he said, voice trembling. "I think he stole my ability to paint." Mira's voice was firm. "Calm down. We can fix this. Meet me at the old bookstore downtown in an hour. There's someone I want you to talk to." Roland agreed and hung up, trying to steady his breathing. He glanced at his unfinished painting, feeling a deep sadness. When Roland arrived at the bookstore, Mira introduced him to an elderly woman named Elder Simona. She wore a long shawl and had kind but piercing eyes. Simona spoke in a gentle tone. "Mira told me about the beggar. I believe I can help. There is an old way to break curses of stolen light." Roland's eyes lit up with hope. "Please, anything. I want to paint again." Simona nodded, gesturing for them to sit. She explained a ritual that involved using a piece of the victim's art or talent, along with a personal item from the beggar, to create a trap. If performed correctly, it would force the beggar to release the stolen glory. "But be warned," Simona said gravely, "the beggar will try to protect himself. And this ritual can be dangerous for both of you." Mira swallowed hard. "What do we need to do?" Simona told them about a special circle made from salt and herbs, how to chant the right words at midnight. Roland and Mira listened carefully, taking notes. The plan was risky, but they had to try. Meanwhile, the beggar wandered near the city's edge, feeling stronger than ever. Yet each time he stole someone's success, he felt a stabbing guilt in his heart. He remembered the day he lost everything. He recalled the laughter of the professor who ruined his life. That memory fueled his desire for revenge, but it also caused him sorrow. As night fell, Roland and Mira prepared a hidden spot in an abandoned warehouse. They drew a circle on the ground with salt and sprinkled herbs around. Roland brought one of his favorite paintings, a small one that he had finished just before losing his spark. Mira had taken a thread from the beggar's tattered blanket when he wasn't looking. Inside the circle, they placed the painting and the thread. They stood by, checking the time. The warehouse felt cold and spooky, shadows dancing from their lanterns' glow. At exactly midnight, they began the chant Simona had taught them. The words were foreign, and the air grew heavy. A soft wind blew inside the warehouse, though all the doors were closed. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the entrance. It was the beggar. He sensed the pull of his stolen energy. He stumbled forward, a look of fury and fear crossing his face. "What are you doing?" he yelled, his voice echoing in the large space. Roland's heart pounded, but he continued chanting. Mira, standing at his side, pressed on despite her fear. The beggar tried to step out of the circle, but an invisible force blocked him. "You don't understand," the beggar cried, pain filling his eyes. "I need this to survive." The chanting grew louder, and the circle glowed with a pale light. The painting began to shine, and the thread lifted into the air as if pulled by an unseen hand. Roland gasped. He could feel a small stir in his chest, like the spark of creativity was waking up. He forced himself to remain calm and kept chanting. The beggar fell to his knees, gripping his blanket tightly. He snarled, "You think you're helping people, but you're playing with forces you can't control." Mira stepped forward, her eyes determined. "You have hurt too many people. It's time to end this." With that, the circle flared brighter. Rays of light shot out, wrapping around the beggar. He screamed, and for a moment, he looked like the young scholar Darius again, a vulnerable man who once dreamed of doing good. Then the darkness returned to his face, and he fought against the glowing bonds. Roland felt something tug in his mind. Paintbrushes, colors, ideas, like whispers at the edge of his thoughts. He gritted his teeth and kept chanting. Slowly, a swirl of light formed around the painting, then moved toward the beggar. No, the beggar moaned, tears streaming down his face. Don't take this from me. I'll die without it. Roland hesitated. Was this truly the only way? Then he remembered Lucy's broken voice, Carla's lost confidence, his own stolen creativity. He remembered the beggar's countless victims. He steeled his resolve. The swirl of light flowed back into the painting. Roland gasped as the swirl continued, passing through him. He felt warmth in his heart, a rush of images and color. His talent returned in a burst of inspiration. He let out a relieved sob, tears mixing with sweat. At the same time, the beggar collapsed, shaking. The circle's light faded. The salt and herbs scattered across the floor. Mira rushed to Roland, checking if he was okay. He nodded, wiping his tears. Then they both stared at the beggar, who lay on the cold floor, breathing heavily. Why? The beggar choked out. I only wanted justice. His words trailed off into a whisper. The darkness around him lifted for a moment, revealing a broken man underneath. Mira bent down. I know your story, Darius, she said softly. The professor stole your research, but you can't keep hurting innocent people. Darius's eyes filled with despair. I was so close to feeling whole again. Roland looked at him with a mix of pity and anger. You stole my gift, you stole others' dreams. That's not the way to heal. Darius closed his eyes and let out a shaky sigh. What have I done? In that tense moment, the night's silence was broken by distant police sirens. Mira had called them earlier for safety, and now they were on their way. Darius struggled to stand, but he was weak, drained of the stolen energy. He seemed smaller, older. He looked at Mira and Roland with sad, hollow eyes. Will I be punished? He asked. Roland and Mira exchanged glances. Neither knew what the law would do with a man who used dark magic to steal intangible things like talent and luck. But at least, for now, he could no longer harm the city. Outside, the sirens grew louder. The city lights glowed through the warehouse windows. And for a moment, in the hush before the police arrived, Darius bowed his head, tears sliding down his cheeks. This was their confrontation, the turning point for all of them. But fate still had one more twist in store. The police arrived and found Darius on the warehouse floor, surrounded by traces of the strange ritual. Officers shone flashlights around, baffled by the salt circle and the scattered herbs. Roland and Mira explained that Darius had been stealing people's gifts, though they avoided mentioning magic in detail. It was hard to explain in normal terms. One of the officers placed a hand on Myra's arm. Miss, we'll take him in for questioning. But I'm not sure we can charge him with a crime like you're describing. People might think you're making things up. Mira looked worried. But the victims, Carla, Lucy, Roland, they lost their talents after interacting with him. Doesn't that matter? The officer shrugged uncomfortably. We can't prove it's his doing. There's no law about stealing glory. However, we can hold him for trespassing, maybe. And we'll have him checked by a doctor. Roland stepped forward, frustration in his voice. So he'll just walk free and do it again? Another officer, taller and older, sighed. We'll keep an eye on him. But legally, we need solid evidence. Magic isn't something we can put on a report. Darius was too weak to resist as the police led him away, handcuffing him gently. He winced, and for a moment, he locked eyes with Mira. There was a silent plea in that look, a desperate sadness. Mira swallowed. She had seen him at his worst, but she also sensed the broken soul beneath. As the police car drove off, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. The next day, Mira wrote up her findings, carefully describing the odd events, the testimonies, and the ritual in the warehouse. She planned to publish it online. She typed late into the night, determined to warn everyone about the glory thief and what he could do. When the article went live the following morning, it spread quickly. People whispered about it in coffee shops and at the office. Some believed it was just a wild tale. Others claimed they had felt the beggar's strange energy themselves. But then an unexpected problem arose. The police discovered that Mira had set a trap for Darius using unusual methods. Some people accused her of putting Roland and others in danger. A few even said that she was practicing black magic herself. Mira tried to defend herself. She explained she did what she did to stop Darius from harming more people. But rumors grew, and suspicion darkened. Some online comments said, "How can we trust a journalist who uses secret rituals?" Others asked if she was the real witch behind these events. Roland stood by her, thanking her for restoring his talent. But Carla and Lucy, though grateful, also kept a distance. They feared the public's reaction and didn't want to get tangled in Mira's troubles. Day by day, Mira felt her reputation crumble. Her editor at the local news station called her in. He seemed worried and upset. "Mira, people are complaining. They say you wrote a fantasy story, not real news. Sponsors are threatening to pull out. I have to suspend you until we clear this up." Mira's cheeks burned with anger and sadness. But what about all the evidence? Interviews with real people? The police had him in custody. Her editor sighed. The police let him go yesterday due to lack of evidence. And your talk of magic is scaring people. I'm sorry, Mira. I have no choice. With that, Mira was out of a job. She left the building with her head hanging low, tears in her eyes. It felt so unfair. She had risked everything to uncover the truth, yet she was now being treated like a liar. Roland tried to comfort her, inviting her for coffee. They sat in a small cafe, cups of steaming drinks in front of them. I'm so sorry, Mira, he said quietly. You did a brave thing, and it's not right that you're paying this price. Mira forced a small smile. Thanks, Roland. But what can I do now? My career is ruined. Just then, a news alert popped up on Roland's phone. It said that Darius had been released from the police station. Witnesses saw him walking away, looking tired and sad. Some said he was carrying his old blanket and wandering toward the outskirts of the city. Mira felt a strange mix of relief and worry. At least we know where he is. Maybe he won't hurt anyone anymore. But as the days passed, new problems emerged in Mira's life. Bills piled up, and she had no steady income. She tried to apply for other jobs, but word of her strange article had spread. Few places wanted to hire a journalist known for magic stories. Her sleepless nights returned, filled with nightmares of glowing trinkets and swirling lights. She remembered Darius's face when he said, "You see too much." One evening, Mira sat on her couch, staring at her blank laptop screen. She realized she felt a sense of emptiness, like a part of her drive or ambition had faded. She had always been so passionate about her work, eager to chase the truth. But now, each rejection email chipped away at her confidence. She wondered, had Darius cursed her too, in a final act of revenge? Or was this simply the cruel turn of public opinion? Roland noticed the change in Mira's attitude. He visited her apartment, carrying a small painting he had made just for her. It showed a bright sunrise over the city, bursting with color. I made this to thank you, he said, placing it on her coffee table. Whenever you feel down, look at it and remember there's always a new day. Mira smiled weakly, tears brimming in her eyes. I appreciate it. You're one of the few people who still believes me. Roland sighed. I owe you my career. Don't lose hope. We'll find a way to show people the truth. But deep down, Mira felt the weight of her downfall. She had never imagined her life could turn upside down so quickly. Her stomach knotted as she remembered Darius's desperate words, "You see too much. Your curiosity has sealed your fate." Could it be that by exposing him, she had taken on a burden that would follow her forever? She tried to shake the thought away. Yet each time she reached out to an employer or tried to publish another article, she was met with rejection. It was as if a dark shadow followed her, tarnishing every opportunity. Outside, the city carried on. People still bustled in the streets, and the fountain still splashed in the square. Darius, once the talk of the town, faded into the background. Most assumed the story was a hoax, that he was just a homeless man with a sad look. Only a handful remembered the tales of stolen glory. And Mira was left alone to deal with the fallout. It felt deeply unfair. She had fought to save others, but now she was the one paying the biggest price. The journalist's fall was swift and merciless, and she wondered if there would ever be a light at the end of this tunnel. As weeks passed, Myra's troubles deepened. She struggled to pay her rent, and the landlord threatened eviction. Her once active social life dwindled, and her phone rarely rang. Some nights, she sat in darkness, wondering if she made the right choice by confronting Darius. One day, she stumbled across elder Simona again, while shopping for groceries with the little money she had left. Simona noticed Myra's worried face and gently pulled her aside. "My child," Simona said softly, "you look troubled. What weighs on your heart?" Mira hesitated, then spilled out her worries. "I lost my job, my reputation, and maybe my sense of purpose. I feel cursed." Simona listened carefully. "Perhaps when you performed the ritual, a door was left open. Sometimes, confronting dark magic can stain the soul, especially if done with fear or anger in your heart." Myra's eyes widened. "So I caused this to happen to myself?" Simona shook her head. "Not exactly. But dark forces are tricky. You tried to do good, yet the negativity around Darius might have latched onto your doubts." Mira felt a spark of hope. "Is there a way to fix it? Maybe a counter-ritual?" Simona sighed. "Magic can be a path with many twists. But perhaps there's another way." Darius was left broken, yes? Maybe your path to healing is tied to helping him truly release his darkness. Mira was surprised. "You want me to help him again? After all the pain he caused?" Simona nodded. "He was once a good man. If he truly repents, the darkness could be lifted from both of you. Karma works in mysterious ways." The words stuck in Myra's mind. She realized that after Darius was released, she had made no attempt to see if he was truly done hurting people. Maybe his guilt had festered, linking them both in a chain of sorrow. That night, Mira told Roland about Simona's advice. Roland was skeptical. "Are you sure you want to face him again?" Mira shrugged. "What else can I do? My life is falling apart. Maybe closure is what we both need." Roland offered to go with her. They searched the outskirts of the city, looking for any sign of Darius. It was a rough area, with abandoned buildings and crumbling sidewalks. Locals mentioned seeing a man wandering around at night, muttering to himself. After a few hours, they spotted a lonely figure sitting against a broken fence. As they got closer, they saw it was indeed Darius, thinner and more ragged than before. Mira approached carefully, her heart pounding. "Darius," she called softly. He lifted his head. His eyes were sunken, his face pale. He recognized Mira and Roland but showed no anger. Instead, he looked tired. "What do you want?" he rasped. Mira knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Darius let out a hollow laugh. "Do I look okay? I have no strength left. Everyone hates me, and I hate myself." Roland stood behind, arms folded. He still held some anger toward Darius, but seeing him like this stirred pity. Mira spoke softly. We came because we want to help you find peace. Darius shook his head. You think I can be saved? I stole from so many people. I can't undo that. Mira took a deep breath. Maybe you can't undo it completely. But you can at least try to ask forgiveness or make amends. The city might not accept you, but perhaps you can learn to forgive yourself. Darius squeezed his eyes shut. I can't. I'm cursed by my own actions. I deserve this. Mira remembered Simona's words about karma. Darius, if you stay like this, both of us remain trapped. The negativity you created hangs over me too. Let's end this cycle. He opened his eyes, tears glistening. How? Mira glanced at Roland, who silently nodded his approval. Then she turned back to Darius. Give back what you can. Even if it's just by asking for forgiveness. And if you have any leftover energy or tokens from people, return them. Darius trembled, reaching into his tattered blanket. He pulled out a small pouch. Inside were bits and pieces he had kept. Some belonged to Carla, Lucy, Roland, and many others. They no longer glowed. They looked like ordinary trinkets, coins, bits of jewelry, scraps of paper. I couldn't let them go, Darius mumbled. Part of me hoped to find a way to fix what I did, but I didn't know how. Myra's hand shook as she touched the pouch. Come with us. We'll try to return these. We'll tell people you're sorry. Darius blinked, uncertain. They won't believe me. Roland spoke for the first time. Maybe not at first, but some will. Even if only a few accept your apology, it's a start. That night, they visited Lucy's home. The young singer opened the door and gasped at the sight of Darius. She looked ready to slam the door, but Mira quickly explained that Darius wanted to atone. Lucy listened, tears in her eyes. Her voice was still not back to its original strength, but she was slowly improving with practice. Darius knelt before her, placing a small piece of the sandwich wrapper and a note he had taken from Lucy's pocket. I'm sorry, he whispered. I stole your gift because I thought I needed it. But it was wrong. Lucy stared in silence, tears rolling down her cheeks. Finally, she sighed and said, I forgive you. She did not invite him inside, but she did not slam the door either. Over the next few days, Darius repeated this with several other victims. Some yelled at him. Others refused to meet. But in each case, he tried to return what he could. The more he did, the lighter Mira felt. It was as if invisible chains fell away from her shoulders. Then came Carla. She met them outside her office building, arms crossed. Her eyes flashed with anger when she saw Darius. You ruined my career, she hissed. Darius bowed his head, trembling. I can't give it all back, but I'm sorry. I was hurt, and I took my anger out on you. Carla's expression softened, though she still looked upset. After a long pause, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. I won't lie, I'm still mad. But maybe I can forgive you, in time. Even that small hope felt like a victory. Mira noticed her own mood improving daily. She received a surprising phone call from a small newspaper willing to hire her. It was as if the bad luck cloud was lifting. She hugged Roland, tears of joy in her eyes. Perhaps this was the karma trap that Simona mentioned. By helping Darius break his cycle of theft and guilt, Mira herself was freed. One evening, Darius stood at the city square fountain, staring at his reflection in the rippling water. He looked worn and tired, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Mira and Roland stood nearby, giving him space. Finally, Darius spoke, his voice echoing against the water. I feel empty now, but it's a clean kind of empty. Like I'm starting over. Mira gave a small smile. That's good. Starting over might be exactly what you need. Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out the last item he still held, a small token from his past. It was an old library card from Brightvale University, bearing his name, Darius Flynn. He let it drop into the fountain, where the water swallowed it, carrying away the final piece of his old life. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the city bells chimed in the distance, marking a new hour. And in that peaceful moment, Darius finally felt the weight of his guilt lift. Yet the story was not quite over, for the final chapter of Darius's fate still waited to be written. Months passed. Darius tried to live a quiet life on the outskirts of Brightvale. With some help from Mira, he found a small job cleaning a local workshop. He spent most of his free time reading books, relearning the passion for knowledge he once had. Meanwhile, Myra's life improved. She started writing again for a new paper that appreciated her investigative spirit. Roland's art flourished more than ever. Lucy regained much of her singing voice, and Carla managed to rebuild her career step by step. Little by little, the city healed from the shadows left by the glory thief. But one crisp autumn afternoon, a cold wind blew through Brightvale. Darius felt a sharp pain in his chest while working. He coughed, sinking to his knees. His vision blurred, and he fainted on the workshop floor. When he woke up, he was in a small hospital room. Mira stood by his bed, eyes full of worry. A doctor explained that Darius's body was failing. The years of using forbidden magic had taken a toll on him. Each time he stole someone's glory, it had twisted his own life force. Now that he had stopped, his damaged body could no longer sustain itself. Darius listened in silence. He was not surprised. He had always sensed there was a terrible cost to his power. Days passed, and his condition worsened. Darius felt weaker, paler. Yet strangely, a calm acceptance came over him. He asked Mira to bring him some books, wanting to spend his final days reading about the history he once loved. One evening, Roland visited. He presented Darius with a small painting, a simple scene of a sunrise over the city. The colors were gentle and hopeful. Darius smiled faintly. "Thank you," he whispered. "It reminds me that there is always light after darkness." Roland couldn't hold back tears. "You're not alone, Darius." Lucy also came to see him, bringing flowers. Carla sent a card. Each person he had once hurt now offered some kindness. It was a quiet, powerful moment of forgiveness. One night, Mira sat by his bedside. Darius gazed at her, eyes tired but gentle. "I'm sorry you had to bear my curse," he said. "If I could go back, I would never have chosen that path." Mira squeezed his hand. "I know. But you made things right in the end." Darius gave a small nod. "This is my karma, my final price. But at least I leave knowing I tried to undo my wrongs." Tears slipped down Myra's cheeks. She stayed there as the hours passed, holding Darius's hand while he drifted in and out of sleep. Just before dawn, when the sky was still dark, Darius opened his eyes one last time. His breathing was shallow. He turned his gaze to the window, where a faint glow of morning light appeared. "Look," he rasped, "the sun is rising." Mira followed his gaze, tears blurring her vision. In a weak voice, Darius whispered, "Maybe in another life, I'll find my true calling, without hatred." His eyes closed. The next breath never came. A single tear rolled down his cheek as his hand slipped from Myra's grasp. She cried softly, feeling the sting of loss mixed with an odd peace. In the early light, it looked like the lines on Darius's face smoothed out, and a slight smile lingered on his lips, as if he'd finally found rest. News of his passing spread quietly among those he had wronged. Carla paused from her busy schedule to reflect. Lucy sang a soft, sad song in his memory. Roland painted a gentle portrait of Darius, placing it in a corner of his studio where only close friends could see. Mira wrote a final article, titled A Light That Faded, The Tragic Journey of Darius Flynn. She wrote about his brilliance, his betrayal, and how his anger led him to steal others' glory. But she also wrote about his redemption, how he tried to make amends in his last days. The article moved many readers. Some felt pity for Darius. Others condemned him. Yet all agreed his story was one of both warning and hope, showing that even a person who falls into darkness can choose to seek the light again. In the end, the city carried on. The fountain still sparkled. People still hustled about their lives. But whenever a stranger in need appeared, some remembered Darius's tale. They learned that kindness should come from a pure heart, and that anger and jealousy, if left unchecked, could lead to ruin. Mira moved forward in her career, now known as the journalist who wrote the story of the glory thief. Roland soared to new artistic heights, his paintings filled with warmth and compassion. Lucy's voice returned fully, and she sang at charity events, raising funds for the homeless in memory of Darius. Carla rose again in her company, stronger and kinder than before. And somewhere, perhaps in another plane of existence, the soul of Darius Flynn found the peace he had always longed for. His story became a reminder to everyone that no one's glory can truly be stolen without a heavy price, and sometimes the greatest power lies in forgiveness and letting go. The end.